Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. My name is Noel Datko. I'm the Director of Salesforce Consulting here at Eide Bailey, and I have been working on the Salesforce platform for about 15 years now, and really excited to spend a little bit of time with you guys today, talk a little bit about what it means to improve your sales effectiveness in 2021, especially with all of the disruption that we've had to various marketplaces and things with the pandemic and just the kind of resetting how we engage with our prospects. And so, a couple of the key things that we're really going to really focus in here are, effective communication. What does that mean? How do I achieve it? And how does Salesforce or a CRM in general allow me to make that better and more consistent within my team? And so that's what's going to lead us into this idea of consistent execution, where just because I have a really good communication strategy and I have a really effective team in terms of what we communicate, how we communicate, when we communicate, if I'm not consistent at that, then we're just not going to see the results that we're looking for. And that's where really tracking this idea of accountability and making sure that those expectations that we've communicated are really being adhered to, and how can technology really help us with that? And so obviously with my background and experience in Salesforce, that will be the main focus there. But regardless of whether you're doing this in Salesforce or NetSuite CRM or some other third-party tool or homegrown environment, these principles really still apply here. And so as we have that discussion, we're also going to take a bit of a deeper dive into Salesforce and look at how this really starts to flow into that sales engagement lifecycle. We'll walk through, at least in the Salesforce parlance and ecosystem, how do we do this from a leads perspective, how we might leverage things like email templates and activity tracking. How does the marketing group really start to leverage the information that's being input into Salesforce in a meaningful way to start creating segmentation in terms of campaigns and lists? We'll talk about some of the things that opportunities are used to leverage in order to drive that accountability. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, Amy. So communication is such a critical element, especially nowadays when we're spending less time face-to-face. We're having to communicate via webinars, via Zoom meetings. We're doing a lot more emails. It's pretty well recognized at this point that most sales transactions are being driven or significantly influenced by content that is produced and published digitally. And so really understanding our customer, understanding our capabilities internally as a company and as an organization, being able to clearly communicate all of those things concisely, consistently, and in a timely manner is really critical. And so what do we need to do to really set the business side of that, right? The business process, not the technology piece, but just the overall structure of how the business should be running. How do we start to put these pieces together? How do we decide where to spend that limited amount of time creating content? Or what type of meetings should we have? How do we have effective meetings both internally and with our clients? And so I borrowed a couple of infographics here from Salesforce. There's a link in this deck that we can definitely share with everybody if you want to dig in a little bit more deeply. But I liked how both of these visualizations help us really understand the importance and the relevancy of both internal and external communication. And so why is internal communication so critical? I find that in most organizations where you start to get, let's say, 50 people or more, that internal communication gets harder and harder to manage. It gets harder to be consistent across all of our engagements with our clients, right? Sales reps start to maybe not have that as clear a direction from multiple leaders. that are existing within that organization. They may feel pressured and on the spot to make commitments to things that they're unsure about because we're starting to deal with ever increasing complexity in the products and offerings that we're putting out there. And it really starts to get critical to help people understand what it is that we offer up front. And so, you think about organizations, you start to get a couple of hundred people in an organization. You start to offer diverse services or feature sets or more options and constraints. And we see this a lot with a lot of the CPQ implementations that Salesforce is starting to see, where we're bundling products together and there are exceptions and exclusions to the various things that we might want to sell or engage with our clients to do. And so, you look at that infographic and you see things like, hey, how do we break down silos? How do we really set good expectations? How do we help our clients understand the limits of these, technological offerings that have overlapping feature sets, and where are they? Where is it a positive to use one feature set in one system or a negative, and under what conditions does that work? So really helping everybody understand and clearly be prepared for those types of discussions, targeting markets appropriately, and really setting good, clear expectations internally before you ever get with your customer is absolutely critical. And so, what does that mean overall, right? It means you're going to have a lot more communication. I love, in this infographic, right, it says, hey, we've got, cross-department teams. We're having social events. We're having, quarterly engagements, probably not a retreat at this point, right? We're deliberately assigning people to act as bridges, between those environments to establish that communication and project manage it or drive that to some sort of overall objective that the company has set here, where you're not necessarily dictating all of those details. You're allowing, the various people who are responsible for those elements to make those decisions, but you have to keep that organized. And that's really the foundation. In Salesforce, if you were talking about, how are we going to deploy this into that environment, this is called governance. And, how do we govern the overall expectation setting, the product offerings, and the way that we will communicate and go to market on a consistent basis, and prioritizing that time. And so when you get to the point where we're starting to generate that relevant content that's going to inform and drive buyers to what it is that they're looking for, right, and helping them make a good buying decision in your favor, all of those things need to be more clearly defined and set up front and prioritized, so that as you're creating that marketing content, as you're doing your search engine optimization, as you're paying for leads of various types and industry focuses, it's really clear and it's effective. So there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done up front from a business process perspective that's probably going to involve more of a committee, more of a larger group to really help people get on that same page. And that's time really, really well invested, just because of the influence and the clarity that you can drive from that and how buyers are really consuming that information. Amy, let's go to the next slide. So with that said, you can definitely go overboard and get much too rigid with what those offerings might be, what that process is going to be in your system. You can very easily and very quickly over-engineer an environment to the point where it's largely a detriment to that communication. It's inflexible. It's not, well, let me put it this way, you've missed the mark with those potential customers that are out there. And so you need to do just enough to really give clear and concise and options and features and things that your customers want. But especially if you're in an environment, say in professional services or something where you're doing customization, of various products or different types of features, if it's not a take it or leave it type offering, you've got to give yourself enough leeway and a path to really establish those customizations without making it onerous, without making it too time consuming, and involving the right people so that your customers can stay engaged. So as you grow, and Salesforce, NetSuite, various other technologies that are out there, these are great platforms that don't try and do too much. Give yourself enough process to train and coach, to really set good expectations in the selling environment, but not so stringent and strict that your sales teams don't have the opportunities to challenge the engagement, to give them flexibility to your customers. And so that can be a tricky balancing act, and it largely I would represent that as a bit of a pendulum, right? You're going to swing it a little bit too far. You might make things a little too rigid. Be comfortable swinging that pendulum back the other direction, and seeking that balance point for the people that you're engaging with on a regular basis, and especially as markets change, and as you seek maybe going up market and upstream in your offerings, whether they get bigger in terms of complexity, dollar value, what it might be, you've got to be able to collect that feedback and give yourself enough flexibility to respond well and quickly with that. So consistent execution is important, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can drive some of that in the selling cycle inside of Salesforce. But seeking so much consistency here is that becomes detrimental to the momentum of a sale, is undesirable. Amy, let's go to the next slide. So how do we hold people accountable to those expectations, to that consistency? I grabbed just a simple graphic here from Pipedrive that I think really illustrates something that gets missed very, very frequently in sales life cycles. And it's this idea of activities, right? We're so focused on getting a deal closed, or putting pressure on increasing that urgency and that engagement, moving deal sizes, whatever that might be. Are we still doing the fundamentals? Are we tracking the details that are really important here, which is that engagement? Are we making enough calls? Are we having enough meetings? Are we doing an appropriate amount of demos, or whatever it might be? And if you don't have those fundamentals, and you're not doing the basics of a selling life cycle, and getting enough touches, and looking at your conversion rates from one stage to another, these are key areas that I would always recommend starting with. You'll see huge gains in terms of consistency, in terms of just pipeline growth, by simply making sure that you're doing enough activities to begin with, and then enough of the right activities, and improving those conversion rates as you go. And so, if you have sales reps out there that you're kind of scratching your head about and saying, boy, it takes 6 months, 9 months, a year to ramp some of these people, are we putting the right metrics in place to hold them accountable? And those metrics really start with activities. Are you getting enough dials in? Are you responding to leads in a fast enough fashion, right? And what I mean by that is, if marketing gives you a marketing qualified lead, are you seeing that lead in minutes? And are you making phone calls out to those leads in minutes, or at least in that same day, so that you can catch that lead while they're interested, or at the appropriate time in that buying cycle as you define those processes out. And as you do that, you'll notice that you can track that information inside of your CRM, inside of your technology. You can start to look at the reporting details. One of the I think most underused features inside of Salesforce is the collaborative forecasting feature. It's included with almost every edition of Salesforce, but for whatever reason, a lot of people don't implement it. They don't think about what it is. And it's an incredibly powerful tool for accountability and for understanding how things progress through the pipeline. Don't just rely on the generic reporting. The generic reporting is also incredibly helpful, and you can drill into a lot of detail. But make sure all of that information gets into Salesforce. There are a lot of really great tools and features that are out there. Things like Einstein Activity Capture, which will automatically log your emails and the details coming out of your Outlook or your Gmail environments directly into Salesforce and assign that to the right accounts and contacts and track those activities for you. Leverage these features. Track and use the concept of sales path. We'll take a look at just the sales life cycle. Make sure that all of that is clearly communicated and well understood there.
All right, so you can start sharing, and here is the first polling question. So do you currently use dashboards or analytics to track your sales pipeline? Go ahead and answer that.
Awesome. So we've got about 50-50 and maybe a few unsures here. At some point, I'd be interested in if we do have some time for questions or comments, for those that are using them, what value are you really seeing out of those reports and dashboards? I think a lot of times we have them. I know in particular, I rely on a couple of reports and dashboards for our analytics on a daily basis just to see, how our organization is doing, what's in the sales pipeline, how's that going to impact our operations here. What metrics are you finding that make a big difference? Maybe share that in the comments here, or throw a couple of questions and say, hey, I'm not sure, maybe help me understand what that looks like. But I think really thinking of that kind of from with the end in mind is really critical, and that's actually what we're going to do here in just a second in Salesforce. I have a demo environment that I've set up for this discussion. I've loaded some dummy data into this environment, and I've got some reporting, I've got some dashboards, I've got forecasting set up. And so what we'll do is we'll take a look and just kind of a quick overview and discuss, hey, how does this help communication? How does this help drive that sales consistency and that accountability? And then I'll walk you through kind of the normal life cycle of how stuff should be flowing through. So for those of you who are using Salesforce, if you're not using it in this way, it's not wrong, but this is generally the kind of the best practice, the way that you get out of the box that you can leverage a lot of value very quickly. I've not spent a lot of time setting this demo up, right, because Salesforce is very powerful out of the box. So I haven't enabled all of the features here, but just enough to hopefully drive some thoughts and some discussion here a little bit later on. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to start with a dashboard. And, I'm just going to take a look at this company performance dashboard here. And what it's going to show us is a series of reports that we could drill into if we wanted. And it'll simply just, help us at a glance understand, ideally, the health of what we have in our environment, right? So, overall, we're saying, hey, closed sales to date. We've got this gauge set up, and we're saying, hey, wow, $9 million is way above what we had targeted for our goal here. So, this would suggest that we're doing really, really well. Again, this is part of that communication, helping people very quickly see and understand what's going on in the organization. If I look at the marketing report, right, I can see this very quickly and say, boy, 4 leads doesn't seem like a very good marketing funnel. I wonder what's going on there, and we could drill into that. I can look at our support cases. How many high priority support cases are we dealing with here? What does that suggest here? Well, maybe some of the communication, some of the expectations, or the things that we're setting here with our customers, there's something amiss there, right? Ideally, I shouldn't have a majority of high-level support cases. I'd like them to be low priority, or none that come in there. So at a glance, I can start to make some assumptions about what's going on. And you might wonder, well, what is the root cause of that? We could start to drill into, whatever that might be, and we could run some deeper reports on that. I've got this lead status, right? You remember I mentioned this idea of how quickly are we connecting with our leads? I've got 3 of the 4 leads that are in the system as new. Maybe they're brand new. I happen to know that they're not in this org, and so I might have some questions about that. Why are we taking so long to actually get in there and get contacted with these people? We know that the amount of time that it takes from a lead submission or a lead engagement on our website, the ability to contact those people and convert them into an opportunity and close win a deal diminishes by orders of magnitude in minutes, let alone hours or days. The level of effort that it's going to take to go in and actually get engaged with these leads as they come into the system is going to be substantially higher, on the order of magnitude of 10 to 15 contact attempts to connect with these guys the day after they submit versus getting to them within minutes of getting that lead submission in there. So recency is really critical. But again, communication is also critical here. Maybe I'm getting a lot of leads that aren't incredibly valuable to the sales team. I don't want to waste their time. And so I do want to do some extra qualification management here, lead scoring, lead grading, things like that, which you can do, and then prioritize that for the sales rep. So again, starting to look at this data and ask questions, drive some of that internal communication and say, hey, what is the quality of the leads? Maybe that's why the sales reps aren't out there reaching out to them. That's frequently one of the things that I hear is just like marketing is qualifying these leads, but sales doesn't like them. They feel like they're a waste of their time. They're just not valuable. So there's a silo that needs to be broken down there and addressed. My pipeline analysis, where are my deals in my stages? There's a lot that you could dig into there depending on how you define the various sales stages. And I want to spend more time talking about that in just a little bit, because this is really, really an essential part of optimizing any of your CRM sales environments. Clarity around sales stages and loading that up with meaning and activity and expectations is really essential to the success of really any organization, in my opinion. And so I think everybody gets the gist of the power that you can drive out of a dashboard, especially when you load up various things with meaning here. Another thing, just to quickly share this, right? I've got a couple of different reports in the system that I've modified here. So if I want to take a look at my opportunities over time, there's some really powerful insights and activity that you can actually generate from a report like this. I apologize, my internet's running a little slow just because we're sharing, so hopefully we're not running into any audio issues. All right, so here are all of the opportunities: open, closed won, and closed lost inside of my Salesforce environment. And I've got a quick visualization here, and I can hover over this and I can see that DC Lucas has a total pipeline here for the month of January that he's expecting to manage, and I didn't say close, I said manage because we have all of our deals in here, of just under $9 million. And I can see that in this case, I have a pipeline of $15 million in this particular environment. But if I come down here to the details, I've got 4 people who are engaged in selling in this particular Salesforce environment. I've got various stages within my pipeline, and I can see that not everything is existing for everybody at the various stages in each month. But if I wanted to come and take a look at some of this information here, I can scroll over, I can get those details. But let's find one right here. I think that this is really interesting, right? I've got 2 deals, right? I can see my quantity, and I can see my value that I've said are closed lost for January 2021. If I want to drill into that, I can just click on that particular section of this chart, and it's going to go ahead and filter this report and show me what those deals are. And so as a manager, as a executive, as a sales rep even, I can look at that and start asking questions about that. Hey, what's going on with the McCarthy group or Buck, Skinner, and Clark? Let's understand, what happened here. Do a bit of a retrospective. And just because I've marked the deal as closed lost, doesn't necessarily mean that we couldn't revive that deal. There's meaningful discussions to have around that. Now, why did I drill in on this particular area? The reason for that is a lot of times and I would probably argue most of the time in most selling organizations, we don't hold our sales reps accountable to lose deals. They tend to linger out there in the pipeline. They inflate what we're seeing as under management from a sales rep. They don't really drive opportunity for improvement because we're not really having discussions about what happened in that deal. Why did the communication break down? Did we lose to a competitor? Did we lose to whatever that might be? And not that I want to focus on negative events and results there, but they're key data points that are worth digging into and driving a much better understanding, especially when you're trying to be that responsive organization that is addressing market concerns, that is understanding the needs of your clients and really trying to hear them. In many of these cases, it's not the result of poor salesmanship, right? And I think a lot of our sales reps and engagement, you think of holding accountable, especially in a CRM with the level of detail that we can track there, as kind of the stick end of the incentive program, right? And largely, what I would really recommend is saying eliminate that stigma. Make it so that yes, this data exists in Salesforce, but that we're very responsive to it, that we're using that to drive improvement. We're using it to listen to our customers. So very similar to a net promoter score where you get a 6 or a less or something like that, you get a detractor type comment. This is a similar type of statement saying, well, why did we lose? What did we lose to? What did we communicate not as effectively as we would have liked to have? And how do we make that adjustment so that next time $7 million worth of pipeline doesn't evaporate on us, or maybe we can come back and save those deals, right? There's lots of things to look at there, but keep it positive, but use the data to your advantage, understand what's going on there, and have those conversations. One of the things that we'll look at here on opportunities that I see it also quite frequently in the Salesforce in the selling environment is where people say, I'm going to have 200 or 300 data points that I want to collect on an opportunity. And there's lots of reasons and things that you might put in there. People want to look at like the ARR, the MRR. You want to look at product mixes. You want to collect a bunch of information about industry or things like that. And a lot of those decisions, people start to ask for, well, let's make 25 of these fields required, and let's write 10 validation rules inside of Salesforce that force a sales rep to do something, enter some bit of information along that process before they can save a record. And that's great. There's a place for it. But generally, I'm not a huge fan of requiring a lot of fields because it increases friction in the selling cycle for that sales rep. And largely, you can accomplish similar goals, especially if you feel like that information is highly valuable, by simply having regular discussions about it. If you're sitting down and you're running reports and you're asking questions about those things, that's generally going to encourage your sales reps to participate in consuming and creating that data set. If you have somebody sitting back and saying, hey, it'd be really nice to have this information. Maybe we'll use it 6 months from now, right? Let's make that a required field. You get too much of that. What happens is your sales reps or really anybody in the system, doesn't have to be a sales rep, it could be a service person, this applies across the board here. They start to hold off on entering information. They start to work in spreadsheets or sticky notes or whatever it might be, and you start to lose visibility and control in that environment because you've made it too hard to collect information, or you've asked for too much information, you've put too much emphasis on various things. So be very deliberate about what you're looking for, and communicate about it. Use the reporting system, the analytics, from that accountability perspective to drive better communication, better feedback loops, and be ready to make adjustments quickly on that. So there's a lot of things that you can glean from this. There's a lot of things that you can report on, but this is where, largely when we go into something like the forecasting environment, when we're not taking advantage of this, we're enabling a breakdown in communication, a breakdown in consistency. And we can get into as much or as little detail as we like, but if you look at a properly configured forecasting environment, I can communicate a lot of really important things from this one screen inside of Salesforce. I can see, as I drill down to various teams, team members, quotas, all of those details. And so in this case, I've set myself up at the top of a sales forecasting hierarchy so that we can drill down here. I have DC Lucas here set up as a sales manager, right? And he's managing a team of people. I can see that he has a quota for the team for the month of March of $850,000. And I can see where we stand against that quota. And I can see, hey, I've got, in this case, a pipeline of $8 million. And this is not cumulative, by the way. This is pipeline, best case, commit, and close are categories of deals. And I'll show how I come up with this here in just a minute. But I can see that there's a pipeline. I can see there's best case, and I can see that there's commit. Now, these are Salesforce predefined terms, but when you give this meaning internally in terms of how a deal is worked and where it is, the way that we define this here at Eide Bailly is commit is to that point where I've basically got a verbal commit or a greater than 70-75% chance of close and winning whatever this deal is in the pipeline. And best case is saying, hey, I've got a better than 50% chance of winning this deal in this period. And then pipeline is saying, hey, this is what's open, this is what I'm working on in general. But I can drill down, and if I would just want to look at the commits that DC has here on his plate, I can see down here at the bottom that maybe we need to talk about Chang Burke. What do I need to do to support you over that? Or Power Savage and Abbott. How can I help you get these opportunities across the finish line? We can really focus in and drill down very quickly. And if I want to drill down into his team, I can do the same thing and just go a layer more deeper into this environment. So very easy to manage these discussions, very easy to get in here and start to communicate. And I can look at every month and how that looks like from there. This is not hard to configure. This is not hard to set up, and it's not hard to build a good sales cadence. So, eliminate that need of creating a bunch of spreadsheets to figure out what's going on. Put the information into your CRM, and if you're using Salesforce, use the forecasting feature. Get in here and build processes around these concepts at the executive level. Make it easy to communicate. And then at the opportunity level, we can get much more specific, especially if you're using multiple sales cycles there. So I'm going to drill into one of these sales opportunities, and we'll just take a quick look at that. Now, I had mentioned, what does it mean? How do I get the transition from sales stages to the forecasting environment? Well, what happens here in Salesforce is there's a relationship between each sales stage. So in this case, I've got quite a few sales stages. And if you'll notice this probability percentage, and as I, let's say, move this to prospecting, you'll notice that probability went from 90 to 10%. Well, each of these gets bucketed into one of those pipeline or forecast categories. So pipeline, best case commit, closed won, and or omitted. So if I were to go close lost, right, it'll go to 0% and it will omit it from that that forecasting. But from an executive perspective, this makes this much easier to understand where things are in the pipeline, what's likely, what's not likely. It simplifies a lot of those communications. It takes a lot of the nuance out of various sales cycles. So especially if you have multiple sales teams working in your organization, they may have different sales life cycles. They may have different ways of communicating and setting expectations with their clients. And so these stages can be different based on those expectations. And from an executive perspective or a management perspective, you know, I don't need to really worry about that. I just need to understand, hey, what's coming through. But it's really critical here when I talked about loading up these terms, making sure that everybody understands what does it mean to be prospecting. And so if I'm in the prospecting stage, I might give a simple example here. That might be something where I've been given a marketing qualified lead, which again, another loaded term. In my case, the way I would define that is saying that somebody has expressed interest in our product and has an ability to pay for that product. At that point, I want to hand that to the sales team as an opportunity. And you know, I might say, okay, great, now they're in the prospecting stage. And so what might I define in the prospecting stage? They have interest, they have an ability to pay. Now I'm starting to feel out what their pain points are. What is their sense of urgency? I'm doing a simple introduction meeting, right? And so I might simply define that as that. What does qualification mean? Well, it might mean, hey, they've expressed interest. They've expressed a sense of urgency within the next 3 months, or however you might want to define that. And we're organizing a meeting with the various decision makers to come through there so that we can actually complete needs analysis, right? And so I load up these stages with meaning. What does it mean for needs analysis? You know, I'm discovering the opportunities, the problems, the effects, the consequences of making the decisions that they're working through. And I can collect various pieces of information as I go through that, but it needs to be consistent amongst all the salespeople. The other thing I might recommend is, do you really need, you know, this is an out-of-the-box environment, do you really need 7 or 8 sales stages, or would 4 or 5 be appropriate? You know, make sure that that's tailored to your environment, to your sales team. If you're using something like a challenger sale, right, you can definitely customize this to fit that. If you're using, you know, Sandler or any of these other environments, make your Salesforce environment reflect that and make sure that that's consistent amongst all of your groups. Fairly easy to configure, incredibly powerful and chock full of a lot of meaning and loaded terms. All right, so you know, again, just to recap that, right? Set up your Salesforce environment in a way that it's easy to use. It's incredibly powerful out of the box. If I were to focus on just a couple of simple customizations here from a selling engagement perspective and an accountability perspective, I would do 3 things. I would customize the stage process and make sure you really understand the relationship between your sales stages, their probability, and that forecasting environment. So that's step 1. That would be about the only thing that I would really encourage everybody to customize out of the box, especially if you're going to do something very simple. I would set up the forecasting module, and I would only ever engage with my sales team on forecasting in this module. I wouldn't accept spreadsheets. I wouldn't accept sticky notes, email responses. If it doesn't exist in Salesforce, if it doesn't show up here, it's not in your pipeline. And I would only ever sit down with my sales reps in this case, really, and that encourages them to be there. It drives good, meaningful communication around relevant and appropriate data sets, and it helps us make better decisions. And then lastly, I would be very clear and deliberate about what I'm reporting on as far as the information that I'm collecting in that sales process. I would not especially starting out, I would not recommend spending a lot of time over engineering a lot of required fields or validation rule driven data collection. I would do that by simply having meaningful conversations around those data points using the reporting that comes with Salesforce. It's very powerful, very easy to configure, and can drive a lot of detail very quickly. So if you do nothing, right, in terms of like customization and configuration in your CRM, other than those three principles, you will be ahead of the game compared to a lot of B2B, B2C sales-driven engaged organizations. Now, with that said, you would leave a lot on the table if that's all that you did. And so, again, I would come back and we'll walk through, the whole process here of, how this might actually engage with a client and, starting from a lead, going to a proper sales environment, and what does that mean for campaigns and whatnot. So if I come in here and I see, that I have my open leads, right? I might have a large list, I might have a small list, but I have a number of people that I am trying to work with here. And wow, I've never had this run this slow, so I apologize for that. But I'm going to go ahead and grab just a random lead here. And in this case, this one, just based on the data set, is saying that it's unqualified, but let's just move it to the nurturing status. So I can do the same thing with leads that I can do with my selling environment. I can have stages, I can have guidance around those stages, and I can make that something meaningful here, right? I want to track those activities. So I can see here that I have a task, and just because I loaded this task, with some random data, it didn't get a subject. But I can see that there is a task, and I can follow up on that task. I can start to track those details. Is this a meeting? Is this, however you decide that you want to define that. I can log a call here inside of the environment, right? And again, just task tracking. I reached out, I did something, I know that I did that. That's really the basic things. Are we making enough of these calls? Are we doing those things? Very easy to track that. I can use very simple email templates to drive some of this communication. So in the Lightning experience in Salesforce, I've got a really simple email template. And in this case, I'm just doing basically like a call recap. I'm not telling the sales rep what to do here, but I'm giving them something that just says, hey, this is the type of communication that we want to do. Here is the recap, right? I want to put in there what we discussed and just really drive, that meaningful, consistent communication. You had a call, send a recap email, right? That's a professional, easy thing to do. And I can click send, and it really hasn't taken me any time. I formatted it well, and I've done a great job there. You can do a lot of that here. And again, you'll notice that I didn't do, a beautifully written HTML-based email template. It's not all marketing needs to be, incredibly beautiful and really concisely driven, right? It can be conceptual. It can be in ways that really maximize your time and really help to set the tone for, what is it that we do and how do we walk through that process. I can look at my lead details. All of that is great, but ultimately here, right, this is fairly simple sets of information. From here, there's lots of things that you can do in Salesforce, right? The thing that I'm looking for at this point is, hey, I've talked to this person. I want to convert this person into something more meaningful. So converting this into an account, a contact, and an opportunity, saying, hey, they're interested in, 150 widgets or whatever it is that we might be engaging on, and I can convert that quickly here. From there, I can get into that opportunity life cycle, and I can start to engage. Now, you'll notice that it carried over my activity detail, right? And again, activity is that foundational environment. I've got a consistent way of looking at things. I can continue to use my email templates. I can continue to work on all of those things. If you're in an environment and something that you can choose to, I don't have it configured here, but you can track your products. But if you're in an environment where you can at least loosely define products, it's incredibly valuable. Products, services, whatever it might be, start tracking that. That gives you a lot of visibility and a lot of detail that you can drill into here. But yeah, just run through those processes, pull those pieces together, and now if you're tracking campaigns, well, in this case that one wasn't assigned, but I'm going to go ahead and assign it to this campaign. I'm also going to give an amount. So this is worth $50,000. But as the sales team is working, right, generally you don't even have to worry about setting up a campaign. If you were assigned to a campaign as a lead, this is going to come through automatically. It's going to get assigned. There's various ways to do campaign attribution. But what Salesforce allows us to do here, just from, again, that communication, that categorization, right out of the box. Every instance of Salesforce is going to give this to you, and getting in there and understanding, hey, I'm grouping these people into an email drip campaign, a trade show event, a golf tournament, whatever it might be, right? I'm including these people in that engagement, and as I'm seeing the sales team progress that through opportunities, I can start to get that associated visibility here and start to understand much better what my marketing budget is, how well I'm doing, what's going on there. And this, again, increases that communication within Salesforce, within your internal environment, and you can start to drive a lot of value. So if I said, hey, I gave $1,000, I ended up spending $1,200 on this. I expected $100,000 in revenue, but boy, I've got $800,000 in opportunities here, and I've already closed one, $250,000, right? That's fantastic. Whatever this campaign was, we should probably be doing more of that, right? I can start to look at my conversion ratios and start to get much better visibility here. This is an incredibly flexible environment inside of Salesforce. So, Amy, we've got about 10 minutes left. Any questions or comments from anyone at this point?
Not yet. No.
Okay, perfect. So, again, just to recap here, Salesforce or any CRM is an incredibly valuable tool. If you want to really start to be much more effective in your selling, especially in a highly digitized and remotely engaged environment, it's really critical that we establish very effective communication patterns. And that starts internally. Are we clearly setting expectations with our teams? Are we breaking down those silos? Are we building an appropriate relationship that allows us to be consistent in the execution of our process, but yet flexible enough to respond to the market? Right, so that call it just engagement, call it just FaceTime, whatever you might want to look at there, right? That time becomes incredibly valuable because you're opening up those communication channels, you're breaking down silos, you're making it easier for your executive team to make decisions based on the feedback that the sales team and the marketing team and the operations teams are bringing back. You're able to adjust offerings and make them more valuable, if not monetarily, but at least in perception for your customers. And those are really effective things to do. And as you start to work in that consistency of messaging, that consistency of selling, moving through your sales pipeline, your sales processes, you're going to start to see your activities not just be, hey, what did you do today? But did you do the right things? Was this particular type of call worth it? Was that demo and the way that you ran that demo a valuable use of time? You start to see that your percentages of going from prospecting to needs analysis to a solution presentation or whatever your sales stages are, that those percentages start to get better as you start to collect that feedback and you start to be very deliberate about the actions that you take in each of those phases. you'll see that your pipeline starts to more consistently move from pipeline to best case to commit, and you'll find that when your sales team says that commitment is there, that more often than not it results in actual closed won deals within the timeline that you had there. And so make it easy. Use the tools that you have at hand, but don't beat everybody over the head with the tool. Use it as a mechanism to improve that conversation, improve that overall internal communication, and apply the feedback that the metrics are suggesting and telling you that could help make your organization successful. So hopefully this was a worthwhile webinar. Happy to answer any other questions or spend other time individually with anybody who might like to dig in a little bit more deeply.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for attending. We'll give you about 5 minutes back in your day. So thank you, Noel. Hope you have a good day. Talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody.